the world does not end with an explosion. Sometimes it ends quietly, inch by inch, as the ocean rises and the ground beneath our feet slowly gives way. Florida, the sun-soaked peninsula known for its beaches, space launches, and hurricanes, has always lived on the edge between land and sea. But what if one day that balance was finally lost? What if Florida did not just flood, but truly sank into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves and changing America forever? At first, the signs would seem ordinary. Tides would creep higher along the coasts, streets in Miami would flood more frequently, even on sunny days. Storm drains would push water upward instead of pulling it away. Locals would shrug it off, calling it seasonal or temporary, just another strange phase in Florida's long relationship with water. But beneath the surface, something far more dangerous would already be unfolding. Florida is not built on solid rock like most of the United States. Beneath its cities, highways, and homes lies porous limestone, a sponge-like foundation formed millions of years ago when the region was submerged under ancient seas. This limestone allows water to move freely through the ground, making Florida uniquely vulnerable to rising sea levels. Unlike other places where seawalls and barriers can slow the ocean, Florida's enemy does not just come from the coast, it comes from below. As global temperatures rise, polar ice melts, and ocean levels climb higher each year. In Florida, this water does not simply lap at the shoreline, it seeps underground, pushing through the limestone, weakening the land from within. Sinkholes begin to appear more frequently, swallowing roads, buildings, and entire neighborhoods without warning. What once seemed like isolated incidents start to feel connected, like symptoms of a much larger collapse. Miami becomes the first major warning sign. Once a glittering city of glass towers and luxury beaches, it starts flooding on a scale never seen before. Underground parking garages fill with seawater, electrical systems fail, insurance companies quietly withdraw, refusing to cover properties that are now considered doomed. Wealthy residents leave first, selling their homes at massive losses. What follows is a slow-motion evacuation, not driven by panic, but by inevitability. As Miami weakens, other cities begin to follow. Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, and the Florida Keys face relentless erosion. Barrier islands that once protected the mainland are eaten away by storms, disappearing piece by piece. With each hurricane season, damage becomes more severe, recovery slower, and rebuilding more questionable. The question is no longer whether Florida can survive, but how long it can hold on. Then the sinkholes accelerate. Entire sections of land collapse overnight. Roads crack open like broken glass. Suburbs vanish into dark, water-filled voids. Scientists confirm what many feared: the limestone bedrock is dissolving faster than predicted. Saltwater intrusion is destabilizing the ground, undermining the very foundation of the state. Florida is not just flooding, it is losing its structural integrity. The Everglades, one of the most unique ecosystems on Earth, becomes one of the first major casualties. As salt water pushes inland, freshwater marshes collapse, wildlife vanishes, alligators, birds, and countless species lose their habitats. What once was a slow-moving river of grass turns into a fragmented, dying wetland. The ecological damage is irreversible. Meanwhile, NASA faces an unprecedented crisis. Kennedy Space Center, the birthplace of America's space dreams, sits dangerously close to sea level. Launch pads are flooded. Critical infrastructure corrodes under constant exposure to salt water. Missions are delayed, then canceled. Eventually, the decision is made to abandon the facility entirely. America's gateway to space is lost to the ocean, a symbolic and strategic blow felt around the world. As Florida sinks further, the federal government is forced to confront an unthinkable reality. Millions of residents can no longer stay. Evacuation plans, once designed for hurricanes, are now permanent. Highways clog with endless lines of vehicles heading north. Families leave behind homes that will never be recovered. Entire communities dissolve as people scatter across the country. This migration triggers the largest internal displacement in U.S. history. States like Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and the Carolinas struggled to absorb the influx. Housing shortages explode, job markets strain, tensions rise between locals and newcomers. What began as an environmental disaster becomes a social and political one. The economic impact is devastating. Florida's tourism industry collapses entirely. Theme parks close, beaches vanish, ports shut down, disrupting global shipping routes. Agriculture suffers as saltwater contaminates farmland. Trillions of dollars in real estate are lost, triggering insurance failures and financial instability nationwide. Markets react violently. Confidence in long-term coastal investments collapses across the country. Politically, the disappearance of Florida reshapes America overnight. Congressional districts vanish, electoral votes are redistributed, power shifts between states, debates erupt over responsibility, climate policy, and relocation funding. Lawsuits pile up as citizens demand compensation for lost homes and livelihoods. Trust in leadership erodes as people ask why this was not prevented when warnings had existed for decades. Globally, the sinking of Florida becomes a symbol. Other coastal nations watch closely, realizing this is not a fictional scenario, but a preview of their own futures. Cities like Venice, Jakarta, Bangkok, and parts of the Netherlands reevaluate their survival strategies. Climate discussions intensify, no longer theoretical, but painfully real. As years pass, Florida's outline fades from maps. Satellite images show only shallow waters where cities once stood. Coral and marine life begin to reclaim the ruins. Skyscrapers become artificial reefs. Roads disappear beneath sand and waves. Nature, indifferent to human ambition, quietly moves on. America, however, is forever changed. The loss of Florida becomes a defining moment in national history, a reminder that even the most powerful nations are not immune to the laws of nature. What was once dismissed as exaggeration becomes a lesson written in water and stone. And the most haunting truth remains this: Florida did not sink suddenly. It sank slowly, predictably, and visibly. The warnings were there. The science was clear. The question that echoes into the future is not how it happened, but whether the world will listen next time or watch another piece of land slip silently beneath the waves.
But history does not freeze when land disappears. The sinking of Florida does not mark an ending, it marks a transformation that ripples through generations. Long after the last evacuation convoy leaves the peninsula, the consequences continue to unfold in ways no emergency forecast ever predicted. In the decades that follow, America begins to rewrite its geography in the collective imagination. Children grow up studying maps where Florida is no longer shaded green but blue. Teachers explain that a state once existed there, a place of beaches and rockets and storms, now resting beneath shallow seas. Museums display artifacts recovered before the final submersion, street signs, hotel keys, faded photographs of neighborhoods that no longer exist. Florida becomes both a lesson and a warning, preserved not in soil but in memory. The environmental aftermath spreads far beyond the sunken state. Ocean currents subtly shift as new shallow waters alter heat exchange patterns in the Gulf. Fisheries adapt or collapse. Coral ecosystems grow where highways once ran, but invasive species thrive in the altered balance. Marine biologists debate whether this rebirth is restoration or replacement, questioning whether nature is healing or merely adapting to loss. The psychological impact on the nation is deeper than anyone expected. Americans had always believed in permanence, that cities could fall, economies could fail, but land itself was stable. Florida's disappearance shatters that illusion. Coastal living is no longer aspirational, it becomes controversial. Property values along shorelines across the country plummet as buyers hesitate, haunted by the image of an entire state erased by water. Insurance companies restructure entirely, redefining what uninsurable truly means. Governments intervene, but trust is fragile. Citizens begin asking harder questions about infrastructure, science, and responsibility. The phrase Florida scenario enters political debates, shorthand for ignoring long-term warnings until consequences become irreversible. Former Floridians form communities far from the coast, bound together by shared loss. They tell stories of a place younger generations will never see. Some speak with nostalgia, others with bitterness, but all with disbelief that something so familiar could vanish. Cultural traditions migrate inland, food, music, festivals, small pieces of Florida surviving in exile. On the global stage, Florida's fate becomes a turning point. Nations that once delayed climate adaptation accelerate massive projects. Floating cities, elevated infrastructure, and managed retreat plans become central to urban design. Still, not every country acts in time. Florida is studied not as an anomaly, but as the first chapter in a longer story humanity is only beginning to understand. Satellites continue to monitor the sunken peninsula. Over time, outlines soften, structures collapse fully. Nature finishes what the ocean began. What remains is not devastation, but silence. A quiet reminder visible from space that human timelines and geological timelines do not align. And perhaps the most unsettling realization arrives slowly. Florida was never unique. It was simply early. Its disappearance does not represent the power of nature alone, but the cost of hesitation. The science was never hidden. The warnings were never unclear. The outcome was not sudden. Florida did not fall into the ocean. It was allowed to sink. And somewhere on another coastline, the water is already rising again.